All right, good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see you. We've had such a bumper-packed day of debate already, but let's not stop there. We are not the only festival that's starting this weekend, as we've mentioned a few times throughout the day. Starting tomorrow in Glasgow, the UN Climate Change Conference of Parties, or COP26 as it's better known, is taking place. The aim is, of course, to bring parties together to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. The conference itself was preceded in August this year by the publication of the first major IPCC report on climate change since 2013, which the UN Secretary-General now famously declared as Code Red for Humanity. The report warned of a future of extreme heat waves, droughts and flooding, and a key temperature limit being broken in just over a decade. And that's said to be one of the key tipping points in our battle against climate change. However, one of the authors' reports, Dr. Friedrich Otto of Oxford University, cautioned against becoming fatalistic about climate change. He argued that while the report is more clear and more confident about the downsides of warming, it is also more hopeful. In that, if we can cut emissions in half by 2030, we can halt and possibly reverse the rises in the Earth's temperature. We are not doomed, he said. Was that a recognition, I wonder, that much of the debate about climate change has been dominated by doom and doom-mongering? Has the I can never say this word, no, I can't say it. Thank you, audience participation. Has the fantastic approach now been deemed unproductive? As many media commentators say, you hear it all the time, that why should we listen to Extinction Rebellion? Why should we listen to Insulate Britain? They're just full of doom and scare stories. Are they right? However, do we need to be alarmed about the scale of the problem in order to get things done? Do we need that motivation? Some of the questions I have: what will cutting emissions in half by 2030 actually mean for the proverbial man on the street? What does it look like? What does cutting global emissions in half by 2030 look like? How do I, as an ordinary person, understand what that means for me? And is it fair that such a political consensus across many of the mainstream parties has arisen on something that will affect so much of our lives? Are those who seek a referendum on net zero right? Or is the time for talking simply over? Well, to take us through some of those questions, and I'm sure many more besides, I'm delighted to introduce my panel for this closing plenary of the Buxton Battle of Ideas. We genuinely do have a fantastic panel with impressive biographies, and I would encourage you to visit our website and have a look at them. So I'm going to give them such a brief introduction. So speaking first, on my far right, is Dr. Nikos Sotirakopoulos, I can pronounce that word, who is a lecturer in sociology at York St John's University. He's the director of the Ayn Rand Institute Europe and the academic advisor for the Ayn Rand Centre UK. Nikos is the author of The Rise in Lifestyle Activism and his newest book, which you can buy at the Leeds Salon, perfectly modelled by my assistant here, or the Academy of Ideas bookstores outside, and it's called Identity, Politics and Tribalism, The New Culture Wars, and it was published this year. Next, on my immediate right, is Dr. Shara Ali. Shara is a spokesperson for policing and domestic safety for the Green Party, and the party's former deputy leader, a position he held from 2014 to 2016, and he is the author of two popular books in green politics, including Why Vote Green, 2015, and he's a regular panel debater at the Battle of Ideas Festival over the years, so we're really delighted to have you here, Shara. Thank you. Then next up, on my far left, we have Sheila Mcnerney. Sheila is an independent built environment consultant. She is currently working for Manchester City Council on a range of development schemes. Over the past 30 years, Sheila has led multiple teams of investors, property experts, planners, architects and businesses in cities right across the UK. And what that's done is it's given a really fascinating blend of insight into local authority and private sector experience. So we're delighted to have you here, Sheila. And last, but by no means least, is Martian Wright, who is a writer and speaker. He's the former editor-in-chief at Green Futures and the current director of Positive News. And Positive News is a media cooperative focused on good journalism and good stuff. And you can watch Martin's keynote on the case for optimism at the Global Good Awards by clicking on his biography, which you will find on our website. So we're delighted to have you as well, Martin. Thank you very much. Can you give our panel a round of applause? So each of my panellists will have sort of 5 to 6 minutes to give some introductory thoughts, and then we'll come out to yourself. So Nikos, whenever you're ready, please.
I am ready. Thank you very much. So the blurb asks, what do we do about climate change? But before you trust someone to do something about a problem, you have to make sure that you share some values and you have the same goals. As an example, imagine you want to remove an appendix and you go to the doctor. You want to make sure, for example, that the doctor does not consider that appendices have inherent value, or is not someone who hates you, or is not someone who believes only in homeopathy. And we need to ask the same questions to the people who will deal with the big issue of climate change. And this question is, what are your standards? What are your values? And what are your goals? How do you view life? And the way I see it, there are two ways to view the actually existing and big problem of climate change. The first is you view it through a prism where your standard is the betterment of human condition, when your standard is human flourishing. And in that case, you understand that, of course, we have a problem, but also you understand that the way we survive and the way we flourish is by constantly interfering with nature and constantly changing nature. And also you understand that by constantly changing nature, we make nature safer. You might wonder, what's safer? But I'm told all this time about these dangers. Yes, if you see, for example, how many people die from causes that have to do with the wrath of nature today compared to centuries ago, there has been a sharp decline. And why is this decline? This decline is because we use life-enhancing and life-saving technologies to make nature a safer place, a safer home for us. And these technologies use energy. And part of this energy is fossil fuels. So, for example, in any discussion we have about climate, we should deal with energy in the same way we deal with the vaccines. What do we say about the vaccines? We start by the fact that they save lives and they make our life better. And then we discuss there might be also some counter effects, but our main point is the big picture here is that they make our lives better. And I think the same should happen also with how do we discuss energy. So that would be the application, for example, in climate change. So make sure that we deal with this topic, but also make sure that we don't compromise what makes human life and flourishing important and possible. That's the one prism. The second prism to view the topic is not having as your standard the betterment of human condition, but having as your standard a nature that needs to be as touched that we have as little interference as possible. So there's this vision of this pristine nature, and any human interference is bad. This is going to lead you in completely different directions and solutions. For example, in this case, you will say nuclear and big hydroelectric stations is a bad thing. Why? Because irrespective of the good effects it might have on human beings, and actually the beneficial effects with the problem of climate change, they indicate an interference with nature which is not good. This will be the equivalent of going to the previous example. You go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, we need to do something, but X-rays and anesthesia are out of the question because this is messing too much with the work of God. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, from these two standards, human betterment, human flourishing, or nature that needs to stay intact and pristine, which of these two is prevailing today in the discussion that is going to be had in Glasgow, and also in the people who set the agenda for this discussion? And I'm afraid it's the second one. This is why you see, for example, energy companies actually apologizing for producing energy. Their narrative is, we wish we wouldn't exist, but somehow we exist, and please forgive us for existing and for providing the vital this vital source that is significant for human life. They don't say the last part, they just say, I apologize for existing. A topic which for me has stuck in my mind as the one that signifies where the discussion is plastic straws. And you would say plastic straws is not important. But here's the interesting thing. They play such a big role in the agenda. And some months ago, Greece banned plastic straws, which is super annoying because we use them to drink our frappe. You push someone and you tell them, look, can we agree that according to the data, plastic straws are 0.00000, you put many zeros in the line, 0.1% of the percentage of plastic waste in the ocean. And then they say, yes, okay, we get that, but something needs to be done. You need to understand your role, the role that you play. But again, is this an argument for human flourishing? No. This is an argument for you need to give up. You need to sacrifice. You need to know your place. And this has nothing to do with the bettering of our condition, and at the same time, it has nothing to do with fighting climate change. So we will hear a lot of things about our future being stolen, and apparently the person who came up with this slogan is an intellectual leader, although recently I saw the UN has a dinosaur, if you saw that stupid clip. So they went from a 16-year-old to a dinosaur in terms of getting their moral marching orders. But it's very interesting, this idea of our future is stolen, because what's the alternative they give? Their alternative is something that literally is going to steal what billions of people need in the world today in order to actually have a future, which is reliable energy, which is the things that is going to make the difference between life and death, or hunger and progress. So before we ask our leaders next week, what are you going to do about climate change? I think there's a more important question. So the important question is not what is going to be your mix, what percentage of nuclear, what percentage of solar. No, the number one question is put your cards on the table on what are your standards, what is your moral compass. Is your moral compass human flourishing, or is your moral compass leaving nature alone? Is it a nature which is safe for humans, or is it a nature which is safe from humans? And I think that's the most important question. Thanks.
Thanks, Nikos. Shara, over to you.
Thanks, Mo, and thanks to the organisers. I always find myself in a bit of a bind at the Battle of Ideas because I've got like 5 minutes worth of reflections from the Council Culture debate just half an hour ago. I've got 5 minutes worth of reflections on what you've just said. So I might just import a bit of my reflections on what you said in my short introduction. First of all, let's have some facts in front of us. So I want to talk about non-violent direct action and the risks of authoritarianism, human motivation, what is it that it takes us to overcome the challenge in front of us. And I'll also make some passing reference to what I take to be a false dichotomy, Nikos. The glaring fact in front of us, which those who are converging in COP26 are aware of, is that climate change is happening, and it's an emergency. And we need to have that fact before us. Some shaking heads in front of me, which is great. This is why I like this platform. Because the end doesn't justify the means. We can disagree about the time we've got left available. What we surely can't disagree upon is that either that we just can't carry on business as usual like there's no tomorrow, or there must be a point at which the human population is going to expend the finite resources of the planet. So I don't mind whether you want to say we've got more time than you think we've got. I mean, hey, I was on a panel some 15 years ago with the then Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone. He was asked a question that I was chairing. And he said, well, it's already too late. Here's a man, senior politician, who thought it was too late for us to save the planet. And I think it's because he realised we've got a bigger juggernaut to fix, which is human motivation. fixing and changing our habits. But we can disagree. I think there is hope and there is a chance, right? We can disagree about the time that's available, 10, 15, 20, 100, call it 1,000 years if you want. In the time scale of human civilization, 1,000 years is not long. And when I was a boy, some 30, 40 years ago, I was worried about this problem, and I'm still worried about it now. We've got people converging on COP26 who are talking about 25 years progress of COP conferences, and they've seen a shift from a 4% increase in temperature projection to a 3% increase. And that's supposed to be a success, a 1% diminution in the projection. That's not enough. So let's have some glaring facts in front of us. We can't carry on business as usual. We can disagree about the exact time frame that we've got available. How are we going to overcome it? We aren't going to overcome it through authoritarian means. And here we come to an important point, for which environmentalists sometimes get a bad name, sometimes rightly so, because I'm no fan of the insulate Britain tactics. That's not intelligent direct action. It's not non-violent direct action worthy of the name, because it's not a good means of winning friends and influencing people. I was on Twitter the other day trying to challenge Insulate Britain on how they were going to let emergency services through, and they said, well, they do let emergency services through. And my response was, is that when they've been queuing for 1 hour, and when they've got to the front, you'll then let them through? So I think there is no way of reconciling that. But ultimately, in the business of environmental action, we have to bring people on board with us through the right means, and that means democratic means. So there is no scope or role for authoritarianism, or what people might even be worried about was a kind of eco-fascism, or the kind of things that the Home Secretary and others think that they need to clamp on, which is environmental extremism, purely because the end doesn't justify the means. So environmentalists who think that the end does justify the means, they need to force you and compel you to do something, they are already sacrificing one of the things which interests both Nikos and me, which is the human condition. You cannot subdue liberty, for example. That is not up for negotiation, frankly. Could that mean then, because we're going to respect individual liberty, because we're going to respect the democratic mandate, as my party will, that we may not get to where we need to get in the time that's available because we rule out of consideration authoritarianism or demagoguery? Yes, it does mean we may not get to where we need to get, because guess what? There are some things that it is not worth becoming in order to save even the human race. That already identifies one of your concerns about human betterment. Environmentalists have never said, good ones have never said that the end justifies the means. They've said the end, the means is the ends in the making. Okay? So justice is one of these ends. Justice is important as an end, but it's also important as a means. I cannot pursue a just cause through unjust means, by subduing you, for example. Moreover, nature. Of course, nature is a beautiful thing. It's very badly valued through the current currency, the means by which we live. It's not valued. What price a beautiful sunset? What price those things which even John Locke some few hundred years ago described as you can take so long as there's an abundance and as good and as much for the next generation? What price breathable air? What price drinkable water? Well, they will have a price attached to them fairly soon, both air and water, because they're becoming scarce. And in many parts of the world, where you have rising sea levels or drought, they are already scarce and becoming very difficult for people to live their lives. So the fact is, yes, nature is beautiful, but environmentalists have never said, leave it as it is. We have to live in symbiosis with nature. That has never been a proposition, that you try and treat it de novo in some pure state of nature. That's never been a proposition. What has been a proposition is that we need to live in balance with it. We need to live in a way in which that we can preserve the composition of CO2 and O2, that it doesn't kill us. So when we come to the debate, and I must be running up against my time in a second, one of the key questions that I hope we will consider is human motivation. And different strokes for different folks, frankly, as far as I'm concerned. We can have a gathering of people, a citizens' assembly, and I think we need to have more of that, because the only way we're going to overcome this major challenge of ours, for our sake, for the younger generation and for future generations, is if we can all agree on a plan which is proportionate to the challenge ahead of us. And that's only going to happen, frankly, if we find that vehicle within ourselves, which is the end justifying the means, by the means which is the end in itself. And that's going to be hard to do. But it can be a win-win situation, because the things that are really important and valuable to us is not endless growth. It's not the sum of zeros in your bank balance, which will be worthless when we're in food wars and when there's not enough food to grow. The things that are really invaluable to us are human relationships. And yes, a beautiful sunset. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Shara. Good. Okay. Who have we got next? Sheila, over to you, please.
I'm very tempted to start responding and move away from my script, but I'm going to stick to it because I'm spent most of last night on it. There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that the world is getting better. We're not on the brink of extinction, in spite of the lecture from the UN's puppet dinosaur the other day. It's not an emergency. The bad news is that things getting better is slower than we want in many places. The idea of too many zeros in the bank balance is no reality for many people. The green agenda wants to slow everything down further, and some want to reverse the quality of human life altogether. I'll be asking a lot of questions of anyone who wants to change my human motivations. Precisely because these problems are in our environment and are understood globally in modern times and are posed in an existential emergency by leaders in all parts of life, precisely because of these factors, I suggest that attempts to deal with environmental impacts will cause greater trouble in our lives than temperature changes. And we can already see this in rich and poor countries. So posing these problems as a never-ending emergency, to my mind, is doing two things at the moment. Firstly, as we all know, an emergency can be used to justify just about any political action, especially if it's for your own protection. This is authoritarian, anti-democratic, and anti-human in its nature. Secondly, the bankruptcy that will ensue from the inefficient and at times, frankly, insane ideas about energy production, that's heating and lighting for us, by the way, which I always thought was quite a jolly good idea. Transport, construction, even drainage, again, Victorian sewers and piped water underground, pretty good idea. Ideas about what we eat, what shoes we wear. Much of this is ineffective and stops us discussing paying for and applying even the infrastructure and technology that we already have, never mind innovating new ideas. There is no aspect of public and economic policy already that is not preceded with eco, green or zero carbon, and we will feel the impact of this. This is quite fundamentally about how we want to live, and everything going on in Glasgow is about telling us how to live less than we can. If you ask me, I say no, but none of us are being asked. Kings and queens, celebrities and leaders of corporations are gathering. Never before have there been so many billionaires focused on Glasgow. But it's not just now. But it's not just now, nor just in Glasgow. This eco-austerity is now embedded inside every business, legislation, councils, planning policies, building regulations, universities, even kindergarten curriculums. We have to change the debate in any place that it's happening. Try to do that today. I think more and more that people do actually want to do this. So is this a salvation? I think maybe the doom will be a salvation, but how do we form an opposition to this? Questions about how we want to live are fundamental. How might we be discussing this in communities, in workplaces, without losing your job, of course, in schools? If you turn up at any local civic, trade union meeting, workplace event, even cinemas and theatres, yes, in my local not independent cinema, I'm forced to watch 10 minutes of statistics about how the cinema does recycle straws, and I'm implored to walk and cycle, and whilst they don't trust me to drink from a glass, I can use their plastic cups for wine, if I reuse the cup, so I brought it today. The problem is this is not debatable in these places. Our compliance as an audience, even to a film, or in discussions in our workplace, is assumed. Shouting at the cinema screen during adverts has so far proved ineffective for me. But seriously, if demonising the opposition is bad practice in public discourse, somebody needs to tell the leaders of the eco-austerity agenda to stop demonising absolutely everybody. Drivers, people who eat meat, people who wear shoes, people who go on holiday, people who simply consume. We have more and more laws with less and less debate. This causes more trouble than good. Authoritarians do come in guises in terms of public health and protection. I'm saying that the costs of climate policy are real. Climate policy are real and substantial, but they're not visible nor scrutinised. I'm not sure about a net zero referendum. Maybe we can come back to that in the Q&A. There are indeed many man-made activities killing our fellow human beings. 3 million still die of malnutrition every year. 500,000 criminally still die of TB. We've known for some time that poverty is what kills, not temperatures rising. It's not actually the world's or this country's biggest problem. The bigger problems are the emerging attempts to deal with it. If we ask the wrong questions, we will get the wrong answers. Many people live below sea level. I guess many of you know that. We fix problems at relatively low cost. The Dutch have spent billions and billions, I've read different numbers, since the 1950s, ensuring that they live good lives, quite a long way below sea level. I know this because I've been there on EasyJet flights, $15.99 each way. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said just the other day, apparently the new tipping point is the year 2036. Even within my lifetime, I think I've heard some dates before. The idea that we're running out of time, I would question very strongly. She says by 2028 the crops will fail in the USA. By 2038, whole regions will be unlivable in the United States. Many of them have been long unlivable in. What they did was pipe water into deserts and build dams. I'm being asked to finish up, so I'm just going to move to the end. But pretending that the answer is to be less than what is possible and to reduce humanity, to me, is reprehensible. The answers lie in more development, more infrastructure, less poverty is the answer to help people. People should be trading more and developing more. Above all this, and finally, in the climate of overwrought emotional noise, and I can get really emotional about this, albeit from many, many quarters, reasonable solutions and reasonable debate is where we must focus to oppose this.
Thanks, Sheila. Thank you. Okay, Martin, over to you.
Thank you. A scary number of years ago, I was a student in Exeter, and I went out campaigning for the Ecology Party, which is the precursor of the Green Party. And I was going around council estates in Exeter, and I was trying to get people interested and worried about something called the greenhouse effect, and they hadn't got a bloody clue what I was talking about, which was probably just as well as nor had I. And there was one lady who obviously took pity on me, and she said after a while, she said, "Oh, do you mean growing tomatoes under glass, my lover? Yeah, I'm all in favour of that." And so I think I got her vote. And I was cycling past that same street, council houses, the other day, and about half of them had solar panels on their roofs, and it struck me the pace at which environmentalism has gone mainstream has been quite startling. You know, once we just had motherhood and apple pie, which we could all sign up to. Now it's motherhood and apple pie and greenery. I was out there looking at the Reform Party. I'm sure there are quite a few Reform Party supporters in here. Reform Party leaflets out there, and even they are enthusing in the back of it, a very small amount of environmental policy stuff, about the potential of solar power and about wind power and so on. This isn't the first time that a progressive cause has gone from the weirdo fringe to the mainstream in a few short decades. Think abolition of slavery, think women's suffrage, think gay rights. The needle changed dramatically. Thank Christ that can happen on environmental stuff, because it needs to happen, because we need to do some stuff to ensure that we carry on having a livable world. But it still leaves the question. Everyone's on board in theory, almost everybody, present company accepted, but almost everybody's on board in theory. But how do you translate it into practice? How do you engage people to make the changes needed? Because it's just dogma. You're not going to win hearts and minds. You're not going to get outside the bubble. And I think one of the interesting things is there are many different shades of green and many different motivations. And we've heard some of these expressed actually kind of on both sides of the argument. Earlier, there's that fundamentalist deep green one, which I think Sheila was satirising quite effectively, the idea that the earth is sacred, we've got a duty to live lightly upon it, rooted in a belief we are just part of a whole. People often like to cite the ancient wisdom of indigenous peoples as a call to reject materialism and lead a simpler life, which is an absolutely gorgeous vision, and it's completely out of kilter with where most people are today, including, and this is slightly heretical, including most indigenous peoples themselves, at least the ones that I've met, who, surprise, surprise, turn out to want decent mobile reception as much as the rest of us. But there are strands of that run through people's relationship with the natural world, to some extent, I suspect, in part, motivate people to want some kind of environmental action. You know, if you've paused in wonder for a moment looking at the sun streaming through the autumn leaves of an oak tree, and if you haven't, I do recommend it, you know, you probably have a touch of empathy with that kind of motivation. Then there's the much more robust, the revolutionary green, which is well represented among many in Extinction Rebellion. And they see the problem is capitalism, the relentless pursuit of economic growth at all costs. You know, it's driving destruction of the natural environment. No amount of fluffy corporate green commitments from all these billionaires who are going to be in Glasgow will mitigate it. So you want to save the world, first step, you overthrow capitalism, and the destructive consumerism it perpetuates. Sorted. And personally, I find that sort of quite appealing, because capitalism, read in tooth and claw, is a pretty shitty system, after all. But the problem is, we live in the world as it is, not the world as we would like it to be. And where I think in particular this falls down, and ironically there's an internal contradiction in the argument of some in the likes of Extinction Rebellion, is we don't have time. If we believe the scientists, and I realise that for some people here that would be a big if, but if we believe the scientists, we've got a limited amount of time to set the world on course for a livable climate. And unless you're amazingly optimistic or fantastically naive to believe that we can achieve the peaceful overthrow of capitalism and the neoliberal economy and put something sweeter in its place in the next decade, well, you've got your work cut out. That leaves us, if we're serious about seeing climate change, environmental degradation as a problem, to work with the dominant forces in the economy. And that doesn't mean we stop trying to change the system. It doesn't mean we have to think capitalism is suddenly wonderful, but it does mean we have to harness some of that capital, some of that entrepreneurial energy. And when it comes to harnessing energy, it's not just about business, it's about going with the grain of human nature. And this is where I would disagree with Sheila's characterization of all environmentalists as being against doing things. Because one of the beefs I have with some environmentalists is that there's a lot of thou shalt not about them. Don't do this, don't do that. And by the way, humanity is about to become extinct, and it's all your fault for flying off on holiday and eating burgers, you selfish bastards. Now, that negativity, fear and guilt, that cocktail of negativity, fear and guilt, which comes out of the like of Extinction Rebellion too much, I think, is hardly going to be persuasive. It's hardly going to win the hearts and minds of those who don't agree with you. And nor, and this is a completely open goal, as Shara has already put the ball in the back of the net, are those kind of actions which are virtually designed to lose friends and alienate people, insulate Britain. So, what's appealing to me about another strand of greenery, which is all about innovation, about using our innate creativity and inventiveness to crack the problem. There may be some physical limits within which we have to live within this planet. There is no limit on human ingenuity. And that keys into what we're good at as a species. We aspire, we reach for the stars. We do more, not less. That's why we crawled out of the Rift Valley and populated the entire planet in the first place. So shifting the narrative of environmentalism, of climate action, from thou shalt not and fear and guilt to one of potential and one of opportunity makes sense, because there's one thing we're not short of, is opportunities. There are shed loads of technical, creative innovations coming down the line in energy and housing and transport and food and farming. And to me, this opportunity narrative has huge appeal. The trouble is, if you just rely on it, you end up nowadays sounding like the bastard child of Boris Johnson and the Duke of Cambridge, which is not a good look. The vacuous boosterism that's around some of that won't cut it. You need government to step up. You need government to recognise the scale of the challenge, put policies and resources in place to meet it. It's not going to be easy. There are going to be trade-offs. There will be huge benefits too, but the key for government is to make sure those trade-offs are mitigated and their benefits amplified for those most vulnerable, most disadvantaged, the poorest in society, so they do not bear the burden. Hence the emphasis, not before time, on a just and regenerative transition. Can I have another 30 seconds and I'll polish it off? So ultimately, there can't be one shade of green that suits all. People aren't like that. People are going to be motivated in different ways, but any green narrative has to recognise people will respond to what they're most psychologically comfortable with. Some people love being on the inside, walking the corridors of power, or at least having a drink with those who do. Some people love being on the outside throwing rocks. Most people just want to get on with their lives. And the sooner we recognise this, that we're not all alike, that we'll have mixed motivations, often contradictory ones, the sooner we can make progress on tackling climate change, and progress we need to make, and fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give our panel a round of applause. Okay, I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions just by the noises coming from there. Where are my volunteers? Okay, lovely, thanks. And on this side, brilliant, thanks, Joe. Okay, let's come down here to the front first. Joe. You guys, please.
Yeah. Earlier this month, they published in Nature Scientific Reports, of all places, the latest confirmation that Heinrich Svenmark's theory of the actual cause of climate change is now confirmed. 20 years research on this. It's galactic cosmic rays, they impinge on the Earth and they seed clouds, white clouds. The albedo effect reflects the sun's energy back into space. That it varies directly with the strength of the sun's magnetic field, as it directly correlates with surface sun activity. So we now know that is the basis of climate change. It is not CO2, it's the other direction. It's changes in temperature with a lag of 800 years, then determines how much CO2 is absorbed or released from the ocean. There is some scope, because of the lag of the effect of Svenmark's effect, there could be waste heat. Obviously, that is anthropogenic. But the various estimates in the past of the total waste heat averaged across the Earth is 0.2 watts per square metre, which everyone agrees is nowhere near sufficient to cause the effects. So the whole scare is a complete dud.
Okay, yeah, Mark.
I'm very grateful that we've got a leadership candidate for the Green Party nationally here on this panel, because I think it reminds us all that whatever our own views are, this is a mainstream debate. It is a mainstream debate that is coming and is going to cost an awful lot of money. And I love the fact that Shara is prepared to come here and be accountable. For a political party that, whatever its relatively minor successes here in this country, is doing very well as a movement across the world, including the success at Glasgow. But I have a challenge for you, Shara, and that is that, unfortunately, the Green Party as the mechanism, as the machine to try and deliver that debate even further into the mainstream and make it successful, that party is itself ineffective. And the reason is because it comes over as very doctrinaire, as has been pointed out by other people on the panel. I picked some other items. It's actually very sectarian. There was an attempt to cancel him as a candidate in the recent leadership election of the Green Party nationally. He's got a drugs for all policy, which is so liberal even the liberals wouldn't touch it. It's very prepared to be incredibly anti-conservative, very particularly in a way that doesn't seem very clever, tactical. It is a tiny bit cultish. And I just urge Shara and other people who are of green minds to think of the way that this movement appears to those that are outside it. The next few years should be about discussion of green ideas. It shouldn't be about
enforcing or pushing down millennialist, Puritan-style ideals to an ever smaller part of the electorate. This part of the electorate needs to be properly represented, and for that reason, the Green Party needs to grow.
Who's got the microphone? Yeah, great. Just keep indicating that you want to speak, and then we'll get a microphone to you.
The Green movement and what's going on in Glasgow and all the rhetoric we're hearing from the media, it just comes across as very anti-working class, that they want people who want to aspire to own their own homes, to drive a car, to go on holiday a couple of times a year, just like people, the upper class, have been enjoying throughout for the last 50 to 100 years, arguably, that they suddenly want to stop that, stop them from doing it, because they're still doing it, aren't they? The amount of hypocrites that we're seeing regarding the private jets, for example, you know, Meghan and Harry, I mean, let's not get on with them, but they're not exactly the best PR people for this, are they? Same with the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, off on a private jet all the time. I come from a working class background. I deserve to go on holiday to Benidorm, wherever it is I want to go, just as much they've got an entitlement to go on holiday as well. I just see this as just stopping people like me from progressing like they've done. Why do they deserve it, but I don't? And I just feel they're using environmentalism as a way of stopping us from doing what they're doing. And one more thing. I just want to say one more thing. I'm very much interested in making the earth a cleaner place. If we can have airplanes and transportation that's clean, I'm very much for it, but not to the detriment of human progress. We've got this far. Look at how poverty's reduced. Poverty's reduced massively because of what we're doing now. And what do people in Glasgow want to do? Gates, etc. They want to stop that. That's the way I see it. How can we reverse that so we can have a positive energy, climate debate?
OK, thanks. Can you pass that to the gentleman behind you in the grey top? But we'll come down here first. Yeah, lady in the pink scarf. Grey top.
I'm just a bit confused because it sounds as though you're, I don't know, either you're Shriar and what's his name?
Martin.
Martin, sorry. As though the debate is over. The science is clear. And Shihar, you say that we need facts. And maybe I heard you wrong, but I think I heard you say that air and water are becoming scarce in parts of the world, which doesn't seem to me scientifically correct. I mean, I don't see how we can run out of air and water. I also don't understand how... I remember reading that for the amount of money that is being proposed to spend on reducing the Earth's climate by whatever it is, degrees that was agreed at the Rio summit several years ago, we could give everybody on the planet clean water, which seems to me much more important. And finally, and I'd just like you both to come back on this, and finally, why do you not seem to count humanity as a resource? You, at least, Martin, said that, you know, we have infinite creativity, so why this pessimism about humanity's potential? It seems as though you're coming down on the side that Nikos was challenging you on. You're not about human flourishing first. You're on the planet, don't touch it first. So please clarify.
OK, great. I'm going to take 2 more questions. Joe, next to the guy in the white at the back. He's been waiting a while. The guy in the grey. And then we'll come back to Martin, what's his name, and everybody else.
So I think one of the things that's going to feature heavily this weekend at COP26 is the demonisation of red meat. So, you know, apparently cow farts are killing us all, and we need to get rid of cows. However, in replacement, we want to ship avocados in from Peru, bananas in from other countries all around the world, which is going to burn fossil fuels. We also want to deplete the soil in order to grow these crops as well. I came here from Stoke-on-Trent today. I went through the peaks and saw fields and fields and fields of farms that had their cattle, their sheep. Why aren't we being encouraged to support our local farmers and our local greengrocers instead of shipping it in from around the world and burning all these fossil fuels?
Great, thanks. And then the chap at the back, and then I'll come back out to you in a minute. Yeah.
Hi,
Can you stand up just for the... Thanks.
Yeah, sure. This might seem a bit silly, but I promise it's a genuine question. It's for Dr. Ali. You mentioned that the sea levels in some areas of the world are rising, but to my simple mind, that doesn't make any sense at all, because if the sea levels are rising, wouldn't they rise all over the world at basically the same rate? And that is it is a genuine question.
Great, thanks. Okay. Guys, you're not going to have time to pick up on everything. Pick one thing that you want to come back on. Nikos, we'll start with you. We'll just come along the panel this way.
Yeah, just one thing. This division that there is supposedly these radical environmentalists that are hijacking the agenda and then the rest of us. I think in politics this is not the case. Most people have the same mindset as the environmentalists. And let me give you 3 examples. Think about how much the mainstream left and right trust individuals to make choices in their own lives. The answer is almost 0. So it's not that the environmentalists here are an outlier. Or think about how they view freedom. Even the Conservative Party, and this became clear in the last 19 months, they view freedom as a luxury. It's like this white shirt that you wear on a Sunday if the weather is nice, not as an existential need. So again, no major difference between the worldview of environmentalism and of mainstream parties. And the most important thing, not understanding how wealth is created. We hear about resources that are going to run out, as if we get our wealth by picking it from trees like they're apples. This is the same misunderstanding that the left has, for example, that factories are there and we somehow just need to take them. How have they been there? Somehow. All we need to do is to go and take them and appropriate the wealth. So fundamentally, in the way they view human beings and how human beings operate and what are the needs of human beings, the existential needs, the number one, which in my opinion is freedom, the misunderstandings that the Green Movement has is more or less on the same axis with the misunderstanding that modern left and the modern right have.
Shara.
So, I mean, normally when you hear people say, I'm going to play devil's advocate, you don't actually expect them to believe what they're about to tell you, but it's great to have an audience where people actually believe what they're saying as devil's advocates' positions, it seems. In terms of the science, the great thing about science is that it's conclusively falsifiable, and you can go and look at the research, you can go and look at the COP, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change research and the science, you can see that it's anthropocentric climate change. So, you know, you can look at the science, you can look at the authority, and you can make your decision. There's also a science about human psychology and belief. And, you know, frankly, people don't like being told, for example, that they're living in denial. But I think that people do often live in denial. They live in denial of the reality, and they think that you can carry on business as usual. And one of those problems is that if we are the last generation able to actually do something about this, then it's absolutely the case that there are many goods, commodities, and inventions that we've got used to that we simply will not be able to carry on having. And that there is an intergenerational inequality there, just as there is an international inequality between those in low-lying coastal areas who are suffering from sea level rise. And you're absolutely right, it's happening globally as a result of glacier retreat, Bangladesh, the Maldives, even in Florida. People are still buying. The real estate agents are having a run on people who want beach properties, quite irrespective of the fact that they're living in denial that the actual shoreline is coming closer on an annual basis. So people do like to live in denial. So here are some facts about overconsumption. The more you earn, the more you think you can't afford what you really need. Well, that's not because you don't have more stuff already. It's just that you generate more and more insatiable desires, which are more difficult to actually satisfy. But once you realise that, once you realise this truth about the current human condition in Western so-called civilised democracies, it's not actually making you happier. This wealth, this accumulation isn't making you happier.
Can we just have one more
environmentalists
go on.
try and persuade you to do, and we may not be convincing or compelling enough, that's for sure. It will ultimately have to come from you. You need to learn this for yourself, is that those things which are really valuable, invaluable in life, and it's drinkable water, not just water, it's breathable air, not just air, or nature in itself. Those things which are really invaluable in life, the current system does not value or cost. In the same way that we plunder the earth, we don't give back any kind of debt to the planet or the earth, which those future generations who aren't around yet are suffering from if we don't change course.
Thank you. Martin, we're going to keep them a little bit briefer from this side, and then I'll give you more time at the end. But Martin next, please.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting seeing what's happened to the state of climate science over the years, because when scientists started fulminating, theorising about the greenhouse effect back in the 19th century, but it started gaining some traction in the scientific community about 40 years ago or so, ish. And quite a lot of scientists weren't persuaded. A lot more research needed to be done. And as it started to break the surface, climate scientists came up against the full force of the lobbying power of the fossil fuel industry, which is enormous. And that was pushed right hard against them. And it went on being pushed against them for years and years and years. But the sheer weight of the science was such that gradually it overwhelmed it. It gradually overwhelmed it. And any scientist who managed to come up with a convincing refutation of the global warming consensus would have riches beyond the dreams of avarice, because he would get so much money from the fossil fuel lobby, who are still pushing against that, still getting heavily subsidized by governments to do so. So, sadly, I would love climate science to turn out to all be a myth. It'd be brilliant. You wouldn't have to worry about what kind of world my grandchildren are going to be living in. But the reason that we worry, those of us who do worry, about climate change, about greenhouse gases and all that, it's not because we're concerned about, the chemical makeup of the atmosphere. It's we're concerned this is going to produce more poverty, which is going to kill more people. And that's the reason that we worry about this stuff. It's because we worry about people, not because we worry about squirrels or whatever.
Thanks, Martin. Sheila.
I just want to say I don't come to the battle of ideas for the audience to mainly agree with me, but anyway. I think just a couple of points. I don't think it's a valid argument in a discussion to accuse the people opposing your ideas of just being in denial. I just don't think that's a valid argument at all. The fact is, I don't want business as usual. Absolutely don't want business as usual. I've spent all of my adult life arguing with people about my environment, about how we work, how we live, engaged in political discussions and social discussions. I don't want business as usual. I want massive economic growth. I want more insatiable desires. I want huge investment into nuclear and fracking in this country. I have ideas that are worthy of debate and discussion, that are not being considered in Glasgow by all of those people with resources and power and influence. I don't believe, I've never voted for the Green Party, but I don't believe the Green Party will get into power. They're not needed to get into power because the Green policies are already in power. The Green policies are embedded in every part of our life already. They've come in undemocratically. Nobody had to go to a ballot box and vote for a set of green policies. They're already there.
Okay, great. Thanks. Could you give that to Ella just behind you? And then, where's Joel gone? Could you bring it down to this gentleman here at the front in red, I think? Yeah, you, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a sort of a bit of an abstract point about, Shara mentioned how we value things. And actually, in your introduction, you mentioned human beings and nature needing to be in symbiosis, I think is the word you used. And it strikes me that if you take a step back from the discussion about what percentage we have to be at, or all the kind of details of how to fight the climate emergency, climate change, whatever you want to call it, there is this fundamental misunderstanding, or at least it's become a dirty word or a kind of forbidden idea now, to believe in human supremacy, or as human beings being the most important thing, that human beings give meaning to nature. Now, you don't want to be stupid about it. Anyone who's gone swimming in the sea, like my nanny who grew up in Sligo, will tell you always have respect for nature, because you only have to be in the power of the swell of a wave to understand that. But it was only until I read Samuel Beckett's 1976 poem Roundelay, which is about walking along a quiet beach, that I think I understood the value of the beauty of what I was surrounded by, the beauty of a sunset, that it was actually human beings and human interactions and human thought and history that gave my understanding, that actually embedded value into that thing. I mean, that's why some people find brutalist cement block architecture beautiful. It doesn't have to be green. The way in which we understand value in things is it's from us. It's about human beings being the most important. And Martin has touched on this in a way, but it seems to me that we have to get a little bit harder about suggesting that we don't owe a debt to nature, but that it is we are the ones who make the world understandable and valuable. That if we didn't exist, and I suppose this is part of the argument of, as I'm very glad Martin said, caring about human beings and not squirrels, that none of this would matter. It's almost like the argument, if a tree falls, that stupid cliche, if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? Is nature important or beautiful or valuable if we don't give it that value? And therefore we have to start saying that human beings are the most important, are more important than whether it's the extremes of Extinction Rebellion going around tree hugging, to the more serious things of suggesting that we have to, rewild sections of the English countryside because that's what's better for the bees and stuff. Arguing for human supremacy and human and exceptionalism and it being more important seems to be lacking in all of this.
Thanks, great. Down to the front, the guy in the black shirt.
I would like to hear the panel's concerns or response to sort of my concerns, especially in light of the emphasis placed on running out of time. Because we're confronted with a complex debate where there's disputes about the nature of the problem, the effectiveness of various strategies. But what seems to be indisputable is that the nations that contribute most to the problem at hand are absent from COP26. So what does a panel, what are the implications of this, especially if, as you keep saying, we're running out of time, and the people who seem to be sort of, the villains in the piece really are not there, or not on the same page, or not spouting the same green agenda. I'm possibly quite sympathetic with them, because I think the problem is too big to be left to the hands of environmentalists. So I would like to hear your response to them.
I'm just going to keep going with questions and then come back to you for your final sum up. Joe, can you go to the lady just in front of Jacob and then Jacob? And this chap here, please. Yeah.
In 1982, I was at university and we were all summoned down to the main hall and lectures were suspended for the day. And they drafted in environmental scientists and luminaries and policy wonks, and the big message that we had to hear that day was that on current trends, overpopulation would mean, and I remember this date, by 2020, there simply would not be enough food for us all to eat. Yeah. Of course, in the intervening years, technological innovation and chemical innovation meant that you could get 8 times more food out of the same hectareage of land than previously. And of course, logistical systems and distribution systems and standardization of transport systems meant that any one of us now can go to any one of a dozen places within easy reach of our own homes and get any food practically we want from anywhere in the world. It reminded me very much of that wonderful movie from 5 or 6 years ago, The Martian. If you remember the story, the guy got stranded on Mars, and he had those 2 choices that Nikos gave us in his opening remarks. He could have gazed at his navel and sat there and waited for his oxygen to run out, but he decided the opposite. He decided to get busy, and in his own words, science the shit out of it. Yeah? And I'm with him. And nobody can tell me that huge areas of this planet, this wonderful, beautiful planet we're on, remain untapped. Huge deserts could be transformed into greenhouses. I looked at sci-fi comics as a kid, and there were underwater cities that were propelled by the movement of the tides around it to produce energy. Where are they? There are so much we have still yet to do. We haven't even scratched the surface.
Right, thank you. To the back, right to the back to your fellow volunteer.
It's a bit practical here, but heat pumps are our answer. However, it matters what sort you have. Ground heat are best, but cost more than cheaper ones, not surprisingly. A letter to the Telegraph suggests incorporating ground heat pumps in future building specs. Do you agree? When China has recently opened 7 new coal mines.
Thank you. Yep. Can you pass it to Jacob next? Yep.
I think a lot of people are saying no one can make me lower my living standards, and obviously I agree with that. But actually, if if someone had convinced me that the alternative was that the world was going to explode in 5 years' time, I would be very happy to do so. I would change my life in a radical way if I thought the alternative was the ultimate apocalypse. The reality is that science hasn't yet convinced the public. And what's happening is that either the science isn't there, or the science hasn't been translated, the message hasn't been put through. And so the danger is that you have a kind of putting the horse before the cart, where people, a sort of elite, COP26, decide on behalf of the people that that's the policy that's needed. And so I think the real, you can believe in the science fully, but you can't just enact the policies without the public. It has to come first. No policy ever works if you don't have the public behind it.
Bring it down to this chap in the middle here. Yes, Jacob.
Yeah, I wondered if, especially the Greens on the panel, might reflect on Nico's point earlier about why is it that so many environmental issues seem to have so little practically to do with the environment. It's not just straws, as Nico pointed out, but obviously like the key example is obviously Insulate Britain, who want to insulate all the houses, but who cares if homes are inefficient? Why don't we just have clean sources of energy and we can waste as much as we like? But because what that suggests to me is that, I mean, it's definitely right, as people have pointed out, that part of this is because it's not really about green issues, it's about distrusting humans intervening in nature and all the rest of it. But I wonder if part of it also is a coping mechanism for our elites who just simply can't face some of the challenges that we have, like aging energy infrastructure, the need to power more homes and power them with more things. And is this, it's almost like COP26, but is this like just a coping mechanism for elites who have run out of steam, run out of ideas, run out of capability? And so the solution is to tell us to use less, do less, have more austerity, shell out of your own pocket to have a useless heat pump, all the rest of it. Is that part of what's at play here?
That's actually one of my pressing questions as well, because I was looking at contributions to COP26 from various stakeholders, non-state actors and state actors. And one of the things they all did in this presentation, which I watched for about 3 hours, was they all congratulated each other on their superb leadership. And, poll after poll has said that, the population wants their leaders to go and exhibit great leadership in COP26. And that sort of strikes what I think Jacob's saying. It just struck me that it was a self-congratulatory thing where every leader was congratulating each other for showing leadership, but they hadn't actually done anything yet for a start. But it did seem to me that there was something in this idea that they were fairly directionless, but it made them feel good about themselves. Not quite your point, but it kind of comes on for that. Could you bring it down to the front here? Gentleman over there.
I'm going to, and probably in a minority of one or perhaps two or three in this room. You see, because I reject the whole premise of the whole thing about catastrophic climate change. I reject it, right? I mean, and the reason I do that is because if you look at the record of the scientific community, like you said, the last 40 years, right? You go back to the 1970s, they thought there was going to be an ice age, didn't they, right? There was a consensus. There was a consensus, yes. And then there's lots of other dates, right? By 2014, the Maldives would be underwater, right? Manhattan Island, half of that would be underwater. This and that and the other. All sorts of things were going to happen that never happened. The polar bears were going to go extinct. The polar ice caps would vanish, right, by the year 2000. We're in 2021 now, and they're saying, in 12 years it'll all be too late and everything. And look at the sea levels rising now, right? The sea level was supposed to be rising then, but it didn't rise. But now it's rising. Why should we believe it? I mean, just like you were saying about the doctor, Nikos was saying about the doctor. If I went to the doctor and he says, you've got 6 months to live, I says, oh dear, right? And 6 months later, I'm not dead. And I go back to the doctor, he says, what happened? And he says, I meant a year. You've got a year, right? So I go back a year later and he says, I meant 18 months. You know what the conclusion I would draw from that is, I need to get a second opinion.
Okay. Right to the back to Andy. Yeah, give her a wave, Andy. Yeah.
Hello. I am a reformed environmentalist, and while I do care about the environment, I think the biggest danger that environmentalists present to us is something that you said, Martin, that the governments need to step up. I absolutely disagree. I think they need to step the hell out and let us, private businesses, capitalism, deal with making everything more efficient and wonderful.
Thank you. And then Claire.
It's on. Okay, yeah, I was really happy and excited at the beginning of the COVID crisis because I knew that Neil Ferguson would be exposed as a very bad modeler. He got his projections out by 15 times. And they keep doing it. So we have policy-driven data now, not data-driven policy. The reason I was excited is I thought it would reveal aspects of the environmental scam. People who say they're following the science really need to learn the difference between a hypothesis and a fact. Stop calling CO2 theory a fact. The fact is the science means that you have to tune the models to 80% to bring in water vapor to come up with these figures. And nobody's proved that going off by a degree is a big problem anyway. You could move south by a small distance in latitude. You survive several degrees temperature change between morning and night. So there's a whole lot of issues in this hypothesis. But the policy solutions themselves are far more damaging. And that's applied physics. That isn't just down to climate science. By the way, when you hear the word consensus, you know you're dealing with politicians. And when you hear the word settled, you know you're dealing with politicians. So ignore most of what the scientists are supposed to be saying.
Okay, lovely, great, thanks. Andy.
The amateur philosopher Eric Hoffer once said that what a successful movement often degenerates into a business and then ends up as a racket. And I think it's worth thinking about these sort of movements, like the environmental movement, in that light. It's interesting when people say, do you believe in climate change? That's not really what they're asking. What they're saying is the climate changing? Is it changing at a rapid pace? Is that rapid pace going to be catastrophic? And is that catastrophic rapid pace caused by carbon dioxide? And is that carbon dioxide rapid catastrophic pace being caused by human action by fossil fuels? You have to put all of those things together, and they all have to be right. And they are all actually challenged and challengeable and highly disputed. Now, you wouldn't know that because anybody who does that is called a denier and has actually been shut out of academia and shut out of climate science. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Climate Change Group. It's a political group. The foreword that informs COP26 is negotiated by government ministers. So let's not pretend that the science is the scientific opinion, and that when people say, do you believe in climate change, you need to put all of those things together, and they all need to be true to support the sort of thing that's happening at COP26.
Martin in particular will know, usually the shoe's on the other foot, which is that I'm usually one of the people like Martin and Shara up there where the audience all disagree with me, and it's a very different atmosphere in this discussion. And I mention that for a couple of reasons, because actually it seems to me to be a shame that the conversations cross each other, if you see what I mean. Like, it would be actually good if we could have discussions at which all sides were represented, rather than just a couple of people on a panel and then an audience that are kind of one mind. And I mean that in every possible sense. But I wanted to ask Sheila and Nikos, and maybe some of the audience, because the assumption here is this is all top-down and there's no support for it. I have not found that, right? I am somebody who is very critical of the net zero, the anti-democratic nature of the imposition of net zero. But I have to say that although a lot of people don't like Insulate Britain or Extinction Rebellion, they actually go along with a lot of the philosophical and issues around environmentalism. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that this is just kind of like just top down. A lot of people agree with a lot of environmentalist outcomes. And what do people think of that? I also wanted to ask Nikos and Sheila, there's not very much in the way, if you look at the budget, of investment in R&D, but there are lots of R&D investments around environmental, sustainable, alternative technologies. And irregardless of whether the outcome is one you desire, won't that lead to that human ingenuity? That's the point I think that Martin was making about creativity. There will actually be some good innovations come from that. And then finally, I suppose, to Martin and Shara, and on the science, I mean, I keep hearing, maybe because I'm now in Parliament, as they say, they keep quoting the Public Accounts Committee, which says that as much as 62% of the future reduction of emissions rely on individual choices and behaviour. And this is used by politicians to say, we've got to bring the public with us. We've got to change their behaviour in order to, and they say, changing everyday lifestyle choices. Isn't that a removal of choices and the state regulation of behaviour? When I have objected to that, by the way, they've said, look at the science. Well, what has the science got to do with the fact that government committees have decided that actually they need to change our behaviours? Isn't that a political matter that should be discussed more broadly rather than imposed on us?
Okay, thanks, Claire. Now, look, there's loads of people still with their hands in the air, and Claire's just made this really important point about could we speak better, less at cross purposes. I think we can do that over a free drink later. I'm going to announce those details in a moment. So that's my way of saying, sorry, I'm not going to take any more questions. But I'm going to come back to the panel now, and each of you, if you could take 2 minutes each just to give us your final thoughts, draw upon some of the questions and points from the floor and your own reflections, and we'll go in the reverse order in which you spoke. So Martin, over to you, please.
Oh, thanks. Gosh, so many points I'd love to pick up on. Just on, let's start with COP26. You know, there seems to be a sort of feeling in the room that this is a nice deal all stitched up by rich countries. COP26 is likely to be a failure. It's likely to be seen by environmentalists as a failure. And it's being seen as a failure particularly by poor countries and by environmental activists, poverty activists in poor countries who are feeling excluded from the rich person's group. So don't see COP26 as a neat stitch-up by greenies. It's much more a stitch-up, likely to be a stitch-up by the wealthy and powerful, so no change there. Just on the comment about the IPCC, the gentleman there, you know, the science has to be interrogated and challenged at every step. That's what good science does. But the fact that it's an intergovernmental panel on climate change, as if you talk to any climate scientist, I'll tell you this means that the science gets watered down, if anything. Most of the climate scientists would be much more outspoken in terms of what they felt was happening and what they felt needed to happen. It gets watered down, if anything. I've only got a minute or so. The gentleman there with population, that's a great point. So why is that happen? Why isn't the world starving in the way that you were told at university would happen 40 years ago? It's partly because there's been fantastic progress in reducing the rate of population growth, thanks to policies that are empowering and educating women and girls. Real poverty alleviating policies. Yeah? They've been fantastically effective and relatively unsung. We've got much, much better, exactly as you say, at producing more food, yields increasing until a few years ago when we started maxing out on food yields, partly because of soil exhaustion, partly because of increased droughts, partly because of the impact of climate change. The innovation point, deserts, was it you again, I think, talking about fantastic potential for concentrated solar power in deserts. Fantastic potential to provide clean, affordable, cheap energy. Brilliant. Underwater islands, maybe not, but floating islands, which generate their own power through wave power. fantastic potential there. All sorts of bright innovations can come down the line. So don't for God's sake, I leave you, don't for God's sake think that intelligent environmentalists are telling people to do less or do without. We're encouraging people to do more, get more ambitious, live better.
Thanks. Thanks. Just in response to the challenge from Claire, is there a general swell of support out there actually for these policies, and do we in this room, are we just the exception to something? My genuine answer is I'm really not sure, and I think maybe because there hasn't been genuine debate in lots of places out there already, it's quite hard to gauge it. In my work and social circles and just life out there, there's a real mixture of responses over the years and then more recently, and I think as long as they can keep their houses and central heating and cars, and as long as they can keep kind of that stuff going, then I think that they can talk warm words about what eco-friendly policies are. I think it's how this is all going to play out in terms of how hard it's going to hit, and the way it's described by some environmentalists in terms of changing our behaviour, changing what we want, being less, not aspiring. That's how I interpret some of that, and I would fight that all the way, and I think there are many other people who in coming months and years maybe will do that. So that's half an answer. I think we just need to discuss it more. In general terms, just a very few couple of points to sum up, but in broadly, I do really believe that there's more future than history on this planet. And I don't believe that what we're talking about at the moment is an emergency. I think the emergency is in response to the political response to these things at the moment. The idea that we're running out of time, I think, is mistaken. I believe we have all the time in the world to solve the problems of the globe, and it won't be just our generation. Which brings me to that point I wasn't going to make, but you just reminded me.
Final point, Sheila?
Yeah, my other second final point is I do think that I think we need more people. I think people should be encouraged to have a lot more babies. I think we need to populate the country a lot more, and those people who are not yet born are going to have fantastic ideas about what we do with the planet. And finally, I think it was absolutely criminal to disinvest in nuclear. There you go.
Okay, Shara.
So a quick canter through 6 or 7 contributions from the floor and even from up here in the last couple of minutes. Firstly, Sheila kind of pulled me up on alleging or suggesting or inferring that some of you were in denial of reality. It's not because I don't have every confidence in your intellectual capabilities. In fact, the opposite. I actually find it quite incredulous that faced with the facts as they are before us, that you would not believe in the scientific reality. In answer to the gentleman's question, he unpacked, do you believe in climate change? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. The answer to each of those questions is yes, 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 yes. And that was a very good way of putting it, actually. In terms of this gentleman over there, seems like a long time ago, checks in the post, he seems to be a green voter of mine. I think it's actually incredibly important that, some of my colleagues don't wish to speak to people who disagree on the science, and I think it's incredibly important that we do, simply because we do have confidence in the human intelligence to be able to overcome the facts as they are in front of us. And the fact is we're all deniers, actually. I'm a living hypocrite. Right? I came up here by car. I'm living not in conformity to my beliefs about what would be the most environmental way to come up to Buxton from London. So, some of us are hypocrites, some of us are knowing hypocrites. And I think my problem is that we're really all in this together. We really have to overcome the problem. Some of you might not believe scientists because you don't trust them, because you think consensus doesn't mean that it's an authoritative consensus. You might not trust politicians. I accept that there are mixed motivations. When the government of the day puts together programs and grants and packages, for sure there will be some through the capitalist system who benefit from that personally. And we might think of that as a reason not to do it or to trust them. So we have to find a way of overcoming our mistrust and distrust. And I think ultimately that's going to come from the grassroots. Finally, Ella's point. Of course, it may well be the case that the value that we put in the world is somehow conditional upon our existence. I happen to think that the planet has value in itself intrinsically, but even if the value of the planet was conditional on us, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't care about the planet, because it's instrumental to our own survival. In fact, it's the very condition of our survival. So we must take more action to overcome the facts of our existence and the damage, harm and destruction which we're doing to the planet if we carry on business as usual.
Thanks, Shara.
So very quickly to Claire's point on ingenuity, actually if you think about it, nuclear and fracking have become cheaper and more effective. The end result is more expensive though because of all the red tape around it. So in a way, if we're running out of time, we should have had cheaper and cleaner energy ages ago if we had the freedom to pursue it. The second issue is, let's make sure that we're a bit more objective when we throw claims about, it doesn't happen or things like that. I would say if there are 150 people here, I doubt if there are 2 of them, and I'm definitely not within these 2, who can actually read the science and understand the science. That's why in my talk I focus mostly on the frame we see the issue and rather than on the data. And you mentioned global cooling. In the 70s, there was no scientific consensus that the world was getting colder. It's just that it was this that captured the attention of the news in the same way as today we are captured by most dramatic news. So how we read and understand science is a bit more difficult, and we need to be more objective with this. Last point, you mentioned the countries that we don't talk about, and you probably implied that they're India and China. I want to reframe this a bit. We should be celebrating that in India and China and the developing world, the equivalent of 2 Old Trafford stadiums every day are escaping extreme poverty. And this is happening through having some freedom to use their mind and pursue their goals and making their lives better. So 3 cheers for that. Thanks.
So I just want to say finally, thanks again to our panellists. Having done this myself before, speaking on a panel with an audience that doesn't necessarily agree with you, and when the majority of the audience may not disagree with you, is incredibly hard, right? So, and we all say that we're open to debate and we want to have these discussions. So I do think we ought to applaud all of our panellists, but just especially those people who have spoken out today to an audience that hasn't always agreed with them. So one more round of applause, please.